Alright, so in this video I'm going to go over a few different ways that you can manage your player pool. So I'm not going to get into the optimizer settings and things like that. I'm just going to go through some ways where you can sort of specify which players you want to have the optimizer use when building your lineups. So I think there's a few different ways. I'm just going to go over the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. So obviously the first way you can modify your player pool is through the minimum and the maximum percentages. So there's a few different shortcuts throughout the tool where you can access the min and max. So let me just build 20 lineups for today's slate, which hasn't started yet. That's why we don't have the projected ownerships fully ready yet. So we'll get that up before the slate starts, but let's just build 20 like I always do when going over any slate. And we'll go over the minimum and the maximum functionality first. So first thing, build 20. You can see over here, 18 players used, 20 lineups built, Nurkic 100%. Burks 100%. So these are the players that we're using. So let's just find a player. So Nurkic, for example, if you don't want Nurkic, or if you don't want 100% Nurkic in your lineups, you can go to the maximum here. Find Nurkic. So as I mentioned, you can click a player name here in the players card. It'll automatically search that player, a little shortcut, so you can bounce around between different players that way really fast. So Nurkic, we don't want him at 100%. The maximum we want him, let's say, is 25%, not 2,500, 25%. So you can see here, now we set a cap of 25. So what that means is next time we run the optimizer, we don't have any random on, just so you know. So the lineups should be the same every single time we run them, unless there are projection updates or changes, which it's like 3 hours before the slate starts, I think 3.5 hours before the slate starts. So there shouldn't be much change right now. So if we see here, we put 25% as the maximum for Nurk. You could see we only get him at 25%. And yeah, that's how the maximum works. So another thing you can do is you can actually click in the players card here as another shortcut to edit the min and max. So that is essentially the same as changing it in here. It is the same. So if we want Nurkic at 50%, you can change it there. Sometimes you might have to click twice. That's something we got to fix. But yeah, we put it at 50%. You see it there. You see it here. If we hit build now, for 20, we're going to get 50% Nurkic now. So that's how that works. So you can do that concept for any and every player in the player pool, and that will just hard limit how much or how little of that player you'll have. So you can see now Nurkic 50%. On the flip side, so that was the maximum. That's what the maximum does. On the flip side, you can also do the minimum. So what the minimum will do is it'll make sure you have that percentage of that player in all of your lineups. So you could find a player in here, campaign, for example. We only get him at 5%. The field is going to get him at 28%. So let's just say we really like campaign today for whatever reason. We can put his minimum, let's just say we want to go twice the field, so 50%. So what that's going to do is it's going to force the optimizer to jam in campaign in 50% of our lineups, which is a lot more than what we had him if we do not force campaign in there. So you can see now, originally 5%, now campaign is at 50%. So that's how the min max works. You can adjust it here. You can adjust it here. So it's a shortcut. There is one other thing that we have in our optimizer, which is the max exposure. So this does the same thing as setting a max for a player, but what it'll do is it'll actually set that maximum for every single player in your pool. So sometimes it's useful if you don't want to, if you just want to have as many different players as possible. So for example, if we just set this at, let's just go 20%. You can see now we have 21 players used. in 20 lineups. So if we set this at 20%, that means any player will not be owned more than 20%. So pretty much from Bridges and up, none of these players are going to be this high. So if we hit build, we'll see that in action. The other thing I'll say on that note here, I do have KD at 100% maximum. So if you do set a player to have a maximum percentage, and you do have this set up here, this will take priority over what you set up as the max exposure. So that's useful to note, or useful to know about if, let's just say there's a core of like 5 or 6 or whatever, 2 guys, 3 guys that you want to have. In this case, it's just KD for me. And you want to set a limit, excuse me, you want to set a limit for every player except for the players that you really like. So KD can actually go above the 20% limit that we set here, since we have his max at 100%. So if we go here, you can see KD 66%. And then Nurkic, I'm guessing we also set his max. We did at 50, that's why he's around 55. KD, we got him at 66. We have a max value here for him. Campaign, we have a max value here as well. And then all these other guys, they're slightly above 20%, 22, but you can see we have no max here, so they'll respect that global limit. And I actually forgot how many players were used here before. I think it was like 20 something. But you can see now, now that we have a max cap, we're actually getting a larger player pool. So I'm pretty sure this is about double what was used before, when any player could be at 100% max without that cap there. So that's how that works. Let's see what else we can do. Let's put this back at 100. And let's see what else we can do for the player pool management. So, yeah, the other thing I wanted to say actually on like the noted campaign, for example, I think before he was only at 5% prior to us putting a minimum of 50% for campaign. So let's just build that again just to show you one example of that, of what I want to show. So I mean, there's 2 ways, or not 2 ways, but there's a few ways you can manage your player pool, but one of them is actually adjusting the projection for the player. So you can see here, 5% campaign. The reason we have them at 5% is just because of how our player pool is set up right now with our projections, with our points per 1K. So I mean, the job of the optimizer is literally to build the highest point per 1K lineup possible, and then do that as many times as you specify. So that is why we're getting campaign only at 5% if we don't set a min. So another way you could increase or decrease a player's exposure is if you adjust the projections. So for example, campaign. By default, we have him projected at 23.3 today as of now. If we put it at like 30, for example, if we think campaign is going to go for 30, you can see now his points per 1K is 6.25. And then if we sort it here by the whole slate, he is now the highest points per K player. So if we build now, we're probably going to get, guessing 100% campaign, just because his points per 1K is so good when we put it at 30. So let's take a look. 5% campaign with his old projection. With the new one, he is now 100%. So yeah, that works both ways. So for example, if you see Randall here and you don't think he's going to go for 32, you think he's going to go for 35. Again, sometimes you have to put it twice, something we got to fix, but we can work with it for now. Randall, so if we reduce his projection, he is 75%. If we build again, it's probably not going to show up here just because his points per 1K isn't that high for salary anymore. So yeah, let's compare that. 75% Randall with his original projection, and now with his new projection, you can see he doesn't even show up in our players card here, which shows us what players are used in our lineups. So again, if you know you don't want much of Randall, there's 2 ways you can do it. You can either adjust the projection, or you can set the maximum, or you can also lock a player in, which means I mean, it's essentially 100% minimum. So locking in player means he'll be in every lineup. And then on the flip side, excluding means he's not allowed to be in any lineup. So those are some other ways you can do it. And then I think there's one other important way to manage your player pool, which is the player groups setting here. So make a new player group. You can rename it. You don't have to rename it. You can call it whatever you want. This is just for your own reference. The name doesn't matter. So I'll just make one here. I'll call it, let's just call it ceiling. And what I'm gonna do here, just as an example, I'm not saying this is the best strategy, but let's just sort our player pool by the ceiling. So the ceiling is what our model thinks or expects the maximum player can get on today's slate. So you can see these. Let me just make it so so that the name follows. There we go. So you can see here for the ceiling, we have KD at the top, Harden, Curry, Randall, Lillard, Chris Paul, Siakam, Fred VanVleet, Scotty Barnes, love to see that, DeAndre Ayton, Nurkic, and Burks. So say you come up with a list of players and you want to have some sort of combination of that list of players in every lineup. So I'm just using ceiling, but you could do anything you want here. It's really up to you. But let's just say let's go with these 5, 6, 7 players here. We want to add them to this list. So there's a few ways you can add these players to a group. You can select them in the tool here. Go here, click add remove to group, find your group here, click add. Or on another way to do it, let's just remove KD from there. You can go in here and just type in player names and it'll add them. Same thing, same result, just a different way of doing it. Yeah. So right now we made a group here with these 7 guys? 7 guys. So right now, this group this group's not going to be forced in every lineup. So right now, it's 0 to 2. So the 0 here on the left side, that is the minimum amount of players in this group that every lineup is required to have. So if we have it set at 0, that means that these players may or may not be in every lineup. They're not required to be in the lineup because it's at 0. If you set this at 1, that means at least one player in this entire group has to be in every lineup. So this value, you can set it to anything, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, doesn't matter. Same thing here on the other side, the maximum. That just says that at most, any lineup can only have right now one of these players. So any lineup isn't going to have any more than one of these players the way it's set up now. There's a few ways you'd want to use that. You can do that if you think there are 2 players that negatively correlate. So if you think KD and Harden, for example, aren't going to score more, or they're not going to both do well, so you can make a group with those 2 guys and set the limit to 1. That's one way of using it, but you can get pretty creative with how you want to use it. But in this example, let's just say we want to use this group and we want at least to force 2 guys in here. And then just put that at 10. That means the max is 10. So every lineup's going to have at least 2. So if we hit build now, what you'll see once the lineup's finished building is that every lineup is going to have at least 2 guys. So you could see here, Harden, he is one of those guys, and he is in every lineup almost right now. This one has Harden and Chris Paul. This one has Harden and Lillard. Harden, Lillard, Harden, Paul, etc. So it is giving us 2 guys in every lineup, as you can see. Lillard, Paul here. This one is Randall. I think Randall's in here. Randall and Lillard. So yeah, that's how that works. It's working. If you put that at 3, that's going to mean at least 3 guys are going to be in every lineup. Other thing I'll say is if you set this at 2, for example, if you set this at 2, that doesn't mean that a lineup might not have 3. So a lineup might end up with 3 of these guys, and that's because we didn't set a limit here. If we only want 2 guys at max, we can make it 2-2. So that means no more than 2 of these guys will be in any lineup. If we don't set that limit, that means if a combination of 3 guys or 4 guys or whatever is the best scoring lineup, it'll happen. So that's how that works. Some things you can do here, for example, if you want to mix up the players that are used here, you can actually set a randomness value for this group. So if you put it like 35, for example, all these players are now going to have 35% random. So if we hit build again, you should see a more equal distribution of players just because their projections are randomized between each iteration of the optimizer. So that's a shortcut there. So that is what the randomness does here. And then let's take a look. Yeah, that's what the randomness does. And then these are just shortcuts for the minimum and maximum, which I went over. So you can quickly adjust the min and max for each player here. So that's how that works. I think that's enough for this video. I'll go more into detail when I make the videos that go over each card by card. But for now, I think that's enough. That's how that works. So yeah, let me know if you guys have any questions below or in the Discord, and I will help you guys out. But yeah, good luck, guys. Have fun.